So, like pigs, just pigs, or
Yeah.
okay. Well, so it's part of the farming. So how I came into farming then would be, of course, I grew up on a farm, something my folks always did, um, and well, then I went to college, and at that time, it was a small enough farm that there really wasn't an opportunity to do it along with my father. I have a brother as well. He's the person I farm with now. And went to college. I always had an interest in music. I kept that going. Went into public school teaching for a number of years. And at a certain point into that career, my father was at that point where he was starting to consider retiring, stepping back in stages as farmers do. And so my brother, who had remained in the area and worked, got a job working off the farm, and I decided to take over the livestock end of things. That was hogs. And that led to, let's see, what we did was continue what my father had done, which was he had established a relationship with a local farmer. He raised feeder pigs for this local farmer, and the time we stepped into it, this other farmer was in the same position. He was thinking about stepping out, and he had sons. So for a number of years, we tried to continue that relationship. We were doing what my father did, and they were doing what their father did, and we kept that going for a while with the same sort of a setup. We were raising feeder pigs. They were finishing them out. And then certain market things happened that just kind of blew the hole out of the hog market. And so that ended that sort of a setup. And we started looking around for things to do. And at that time, the Department of Agriculture had made some changes in the way local processors did their business, which allowed farmers like us to more easily sell directly to people. So we thought, well, here's a way to grab more of what's the value of what's there, because there certainly wasn't much at the time we were working with in that other relationship. So we started doing that, which was kind of an adventure. That's something we've kept going until now. At the same time, we became aware of other markets that were starting to respond to people's an evolving concern about where food is coming from, where the animals are coming from, how they were raised, and things like that. And of course, you hear about these markets in the farm press and things like that. And I read an article about the farmer from Iowa who had been on the ground floor of such an enterprise. And so I gave him a call, and he said, yeah, we're looking for more farmers to raise pigs, kind of like you've been doing it, which was a different path from where the industry had been going, which was more confinement, more concentration of animals, having to raise more because the margins were so small. That was something that my father had actually looked at, and it didn't appeal to him. It didn't appeal to us either. So we thought, well, this is a good thing to take a look at. So that connected us to that market, which we've been doing ever since. During that same stretch of time, my father took the next step back and said, okay, don't need to be doing the farming anymore. I want to step back. I want to relinquish the responsibility of doing the cropping and things like that. So my brother and I took that end of it over. And kind of a similar situation there. The size of the farm and the margins that were in the commodity markets didn't paint a very good economic picture. So we looked into the same sort of thing that we did with the livestock, which was finding a market whereby you farm in a certain way, you can add more value to what you raise, so that maybe you don't need to have 1,000 acres to make what you feel you need to make with your time. So that the option there was to go certified organic, which we did. So that was a process of transitioning, and that's something we've kept to the present day. Along with that, because it is 2 sons on a small farm, we've kept outside jobs as well, which we actually kind of like, and keeps it interesting. So what we have now is a certified organic crop farm, a livestock enterprise, a fair to finish livestock enterprise that sells to a niche market company that pays us a premium for doing what we do. And the organic market, whether it's into feed markets or food markets, does the same. The whole way of doing things adds certain challenges that we find interesting, and so that's kind of description of the whole stew of things we do on a day-to-day basis. Both my brother and I live in St. Peter because we had other jobs that kind of brought us here. My parents, who are in their 80s, still live on the farm, and one or the other, or sometimes both of us, are out there throughout the year, every day. So we have the interactions with my parents, with the livestock, with the farming, which is a satisfying life. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
So you grew up, this is a Century Farm, right? This has been around.
Yeah, actually it was a Century Farm. I was thinking about that. It was a Century Farm back probably in the 70s, so
wow.
It's been around a while.
So this has been around since just shortly after Minnesota became a state, right?
Right, yeah.
You know, the Civil War wasn't long gone.
No, that's true. That's true.
So what was your thinking growing up on this farm? Did you long to come back and take it over, or were you one of these kids who wanted to get as far from the farm as it was necessary without having to learn a foreign language?
You know, that probably depended on the day you talked to me or my age. Yeah, good question. I think when I was younger, if you had asked me, what are you going to do when you grow up, I was going to be a farmer. You know, and that's probably just part of growing up and working with your father and your grandfather, and you kind of, you know, you see the rhythms of things, and you see what they do, and you learn by watching. So I think that's a real natural thing. As I got older and assumed more of the responsibilities, I maybe didn't think that so much. And you know, when I went to college, then at that time, you know, of course, there's the realities of finding a job and paying for things. And as I said, that wasn't really other than assisting and helping my father at that time around the school calendar. The opportunity to actually do it really wasn't there. And I had an interest in music as well, which I was pursuing as a student. So I thought, well, that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I did for a number of years, and something I continue to do. That's kind of one of my off-farm jobs now, is to continue the music teaching, the music performing.
I can relate. My dad was a frustrated farmer who ended up teaching elementary school for a lot of years.
Okay.
He couldn't get the words and the music to any song right together, so there wasn't any future for him in the music world, but it didn't keep him from singing most of his life. So was it a big deal, this decision? I mean, you were teaching, you'd established a different kind of life. Was it a big deal to decide to come back and farm? Was it sort of natural thing?
Yeah. You know, it probably was a big deal. You know, I didn't really fret over the decision. I think to leave the teaching, although that was probably the most secure job I ever held. But there was a draw there. You know, I can't deny it. I mean, getting back to when I was a kid on the farm. I mean, I loved it. I loved growing up on a farm. Maybe more when I think back of it now. I think about and when I watch my niece at the farm now, who's about 12. There's that kind of freedom out there. And then there's the opportunity to observe, you know, the different cycles, the times of year, in a way that's maybe more immediate and that sort of thing. And I like working outdoors. Yeah, it was an opportunity that presented itself. And I was aware of the challenges that there would be financially, and because I had opportunities that arose that allowed me to keep going in the teaching as I was doing the farming, it really wasn't that difficult of a decision.
I think about one of the few pieces of advice my dad ever gave me. He said, whatever you do, don't certify to teach. Because he says, you'll get hungry someday, and you'll start teaching, and you'll never get out.
maybe I took my opportunity. Yeah.
Well, my dad, I think, was talking about his own life, you know, that he had these ideas, you know, maybe start a greenhouse, maybe start a sort of specialty restaurant. We're raising vegetables. Right. But when it came right down to it, the security was a big deal. Right. And the contrast between the security of a teaching paycheck, even though it was pitiful some years, and the insecurity of having everything wrecked by rain coming the wrong month. Sure. Was he just couldn't see, I think, how to make that transition.
Right. I think in our case too, the fact that it was a multi-generational thing. I mean, there's a real security in that. I mean, there's others to lean on. I mean, if I had to do that, I think if I look back and would have had the opportunity to rent a new place and I was in it just on my own, that might have been very different. Yeah. I mean, having a brother that had the same inclination, having a mother and father that were active on it their whole lives and could still contribute and wanted to participate in that transition, and being open to saying, okay, we did it this way, but yeah, why don't you go ahead and try it, and we'll support you in it. That made a big difference.
And also, suppose enough labor, enough hands to get the work done in the busy periods without killing yourself. Right. Big deal.
Yeah.
So how does this business of trying to do the farm and do the other jobs you need to do to make the economics work out, how does that go together for you?
Like logistically, or
well, sort of logistic. I just mean, sort of. Is it an easy combination with the busy periods of one kind of, happening when the busy periods of the other aren't happening, and it all kind of going together like a Swiss watch, or is it more like chicken with your head cut off sometimes?
Oh yeah. Okay.
How's it go?
So. Well, if I think about, part of it is the way the two schedules fit together. The real busy time on the farm starts in here, at least with organically on the farm, starts in here in May and is can be pretty intense and nuts through August. So as far as the school year, which I'm tied into teaching a lot of times, and that's kind of the downtime. And then that kicks up during harvest, which is actually not as intense work-wise. So then that picks up. So the schedule part, it fits in that way. But as far as the whole chicken with the head cut off image, just one thing that how these things fit together is I worked for a number of years with a local youth symphony, and that was a little bit more difficult sometimes to put together. I'd find myself driving out to the farm maybe at 5:30 in the morning to do livestock work on a day when I had to cover that weekend. Cleaning up, I'm in my coverall and and mucking around with livestock as it can be pretty messy at times, and then cleaning up and rushing off to Mankato, and then getting in front of a group of kids and conducting an overture to a Verdi opera or something like that. I think that was actually that instance, and that was kind of an odd juxtaposition. It kind of struck me, oh, this is in my mind trying to make that shift. Sometimes I looked at that and I thought, oh, this is just really, really strange. And more and more I look at it, and it's kind of one complements the other, and it's just kind of the mindset you bring into it. So most of the time it works pretty well, as long as I'm not rushing from one to the next. And again, that's where having working with my brother. There's also my cousin's husband whose land we rent, who's very active in the farming. So there's another person that's interested, has an inclination towards it. You can kind of trade off. So it's actually worked really well. And the flexibility of working on a farm, I mean, there's things that necessarily need to get done every day. And there's a schedule to it with livestock, but you can flex a little bit, so any sort of work I need to do, whether it's practicing to keep in form on my instrument, I can generally fit that in throughout the day.
Mm.
So it actually, it can be a real pleasant combination.
Right. May I ask what your second job is? You've said a little about it.
Yeah, I still, I'm a trumpet player.
Uh-huh.
So I've maintained trumpet students in the area. I teach at a small private college in Mankato, the trumpet students there, and conduct an ensemble of brass players. So that's a weekly commitment. And I play with a number of different ensembles here and there. For a number of years I played with an active ballroom dance band, which was an interesting 15 years or so. Got to meet a lot of neat people. So that's the music side of it. I've got another job I work. My brother, his primary job was working for a pipe organ builder here in town, and he continues to do that. And I started to do that as well. So that's another thing I do that can tend to be. It depends on how busy the firm is at the time. But actually, about those three things: the music teaching, the assisting with pipe organ building, and farming. Although farming takes the largest share of the time, and it's certainly the biggest commitment and responsibility.
Mm. So do pigs like trumpet music?
It kind of scares them. Any sort of strange noise. I actually haven't serenaded them before, but there have been times when I have practiced outdoors at the farm. Usually, very, very rarely. But they will hear it, and they will stop and be interested because it's a strange sound, and then they'll go about what they're doing, unless it catches them off guard, and then they'll kind of get scared.
I have to get some of my musician friends onto composing a concerto for pigs and chickens.
There you go. That would be good.
See if I produce something that will actually listen to.
Well, it's interesting, that whole connection there. I sometimes visit a neighbor, and he's got beef cattle. Constantly there's a radio going in the barn. And I asked him about that once, and he said, well, that just keeps them used to voices, so that when someone with a strange voice comes on the place, they don't get spooked and that sort of thing. So whether there's a certain station, I never asked them if they like a particular station or like a particular type of music. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember the music in the barn at 5 a.m.
Oh,
out
with milking
north.
cows, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there are generations of cows that grew up to Mockingbird Hill, which was the sign on North Dakota.
I wonder if they still, if they, some of the large milking setups they have now. I wonder if they still figure that's if that's something they do, or if that's too unscientific, or.
Well, it's another career. You could play barns.
There you go, barn jobs.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't pay too well.
No. Well, if you get, if you charge per cow, you might do all right.
Yeah,
with the big ones.
Yeah, that's a new business. Yeah.
I talk to people sometimes who sort of scandalize, and they say, you can't make it farming. And my immediate response is, as far back as I could remember, nobody's ever made it farming.
Yeah.
Everybody I knew was growing up was running some kind of second or third job, sometimes unofficial, and no taxes were ever reported on it. But the neighbor next door raised mink, and anybody who could fix anything had home repair stuff. And the 94 support, the interstate supported a lot of the farms in Minnesota for a long time.
Okay.
So, I mean, the construction on that was what she did in the winter. So, is there anybody who's making it farming these days in your experience?
Yeah,
I mean, just farming, no second jobs.
Yeah, I think it depends on what segment of agriculture you're talking about. I think the last number of years have been very profitable for commodity producers with the appearance of the ethanol market. Corn has been very strong for a number of years. So, corn and soybeans, I think I think the operators that have been able to acquire more and more land are doing quite well now. Now, should the market tank, that might be a whole different story. I know around where we are, you don't see too many of the smaller dairy farmers left. They're kind of deciding to quit. And that's been that way for quite some time. Same thing with smaller hog producers. There aren't too many. So I think a lot of the decisions has to do with scale. Very large outfits, I think, have been profitable. I think some of the smaller outfits have the decision whether to maybe do what we've done, which is to plug into a market where there's the potential or the opportunity for a little bit better income than what you see in the conventional markets, or maybe they opt to work for a larger outfit. That's my cat.
Fine.
If that's not too
background
distracting.
noise. No, that's just the noise that you get. Well, you're close enough to the city that there must be some pressure to sell for. You're close enough. It's almost bedroom, not quite, but almost bedroom for people in the area who only have to go in 3 days a week.
Right.
Must be a lot of the smaller operators who are pretty lured by the prospect of the real estate prices going
well,
through the
you've
roof.
seen that happen. Maybe not as far as where we farm, which is in between Le Sueur and Montgomery.
Mhm.
But up in the Belle Plaine area, there was a lot of that where farmers sold off a lot of farmland for the big development boom that happened there maybe 10 years ago. They ended up renting out all the farmland around where we live, or a lot of it. But yeah, I see your point. I mean, if you look at our farm, I mentioned a number of times it's a small farm, and in terms of two people trying to generate an income from it, that's a challenge. That's true. If you look at the market value of it now and the way land values have gone, I mean, it's. You're sitting on a lot. But as far as the thought, boy, you start doing the math and you say, well, this is like probably going to be the pinnacle the land market's going to be. If we were to sell this and then just put that money on interest, you could I could pretty much just practice my trumpet all day and go out to lunch and be fine. But that isn't going to happen.
So for them city folks what are who don't have a clear appreciation, you have a choice really about whether to farm or not.
Sure.
And you've decided to stay with it, although there is that wading through 3 feet of manure
Sure.
after a rain kind of day, when I'm sure you actually rethink that a bit.
Yeah, and this is a muddy, sloppy time,
So, the most general question I could ask, what keeps you farming?
Yeah. A number of things, I guess. I like working with animals. I like being outdoors. I like watching things grow. I like the fact that you're kind of involved in the same thing, but every year is very different. Every day is very different. There's that variety. There's just observing different things how do I put it? It's very fulfilling in a way that I haven't found on the other jobs that I've worked. And I've worked a number of them, a number of 9-to-5 jobs that have been, certainly more regular in terms of, again, when you look at the financial side and things like that. Times when I've been indoors. So it's the climate, it's the physical work, it's the being your own boss, it's the being out in the sun. It's that kind of touches on a number of things.
Can you say a bit more about what it's like to hang around with animals this much?
Well, again, that kind of depends on the day.
Yeah.
It's well, let's see. Well, okay, specifically about pigs. They're curious creatures. I like them. I like them as an animal. So it's there's always. Let me put it this way. So here's an example. We have pigs on the farm and 4 roosters. Okay, so there's a story behind how we got these 4 roosters, which I won't go into. But ever since they've come onto the farm, they have become very prominent in terms of the fixture and in people observing their behavior and where are they now and did the roosters come out yet this morning. That'll be a lot of times my first conversation with my parents on the farm, because they've got a window from the kitchen that looks over the farm site and they can see the whole schedule of They wake up in the morning, they process out to where they find the feed in the yard, and it's very interesting to watch. It's interesting to watch, and you notice things about them like, oh, I never knew that before. You know, that's and it's from a farm perspective, all these things start popping into your head about these, you know, maybe I can't think of any, but little anecdotes or sayings that relate to chickens or roosters, and you see something, it's like, oh, that's it. You know? And the same thing can happen with animals, with the hogs. You know, on the angle of doing that work and watching animals grow and you know, seeing that kind of a successful side of it, that way of where you're kind of tending and things are working and things are going smoothly. There's a satisfaction in that, and you know, there's a flip side to it too. I mean, it can be very challenging. Animals can get sick. They have personalities. They can sometimes be mean to one another, and so that takes a whole lot of managing and watching and tending to try and keep it all peaceful. But it's but again, there's physical work there too, and who's a neighbor of mine comments on the farmers in our area, and they're particularly the dairy farmers and their fitness and their longevity, things like that. So I was talking to my brother the other day, and we were finishing another task and we were both really tired. I mean, we're getting to that point where we're starting to notice, okay, we got to try and make some changes here because this is getting harder every year. And he said, yeah, well, he said, at least maybe if we're not making a whole lot, at least we'll kind of stay in shape this way. So so there's that too.
You mentioned that you're fairly you're fond of pigs as animals. For those people who've never had the privilege of making the acquaintance of a pig, what's good about pigs?
Oh, what's good about pigs? They're very curious and very smart. They make a whole range of interesting sounds that when you're around them enough, you can get some very, very good clues to their disposition. They're very strong. They're the attachments, mothers and piglets, can be very heartwarming. You know, piglets, very playful. Larger sows can be too, but you see it a lot in piglets. You know, it kind of anyone that comes out to visit the farm sees the piglets, there's a smile on their face. I mean, they say, oh, they're so cute. Yeah, piglets are cute. So that's a good thing about piglets, they're cute. Let's see what else. You know, you have, depending on the type of breeds you have, you can have some very, very interesting color schemes and patterns on crossbred hogs. Which is interesting. Let's see, other things about hogs. That's about all I can bring to mind right now.
Sure. Do you think your hogs have a pretty good life? up until you kill them.
Yeah, I think so. And that's something I think you can observe. You know, a lot of it is a space thing. I mean, you can, as I mentioned before, different sounds animal makes or different behaviors they make. It's pretty easy to tell when an animal is under some sort of stress, and you know you can create that by the space that they live in, or a number of things. And so yeah, I think they got a pretty good life. You know, it'd be better if they all could be, you know, if they all be roaming on pasture all day. And we do some of that with sows. And sometimes the sow and their little piglets are out there. And then, yeah, you can tell. You know, that's like the next level for them. But yeah, they have a pretty good life up until the end.
So, what kind of space do they occupy during their lives on your place?
Yeah, well, if you'd imagine a typical older farm site that you go by, you know, with older barns and things like that. Mm-hmm. And then if you imagine lots of straw, that's typically where they live. Pens outside of the buildings where there's a cement slab or a dirt lot with lots of straw. Small pasture lots where sows have access in season from maybe May through September. That's where they spend their time. So it's an outdoor access. It's a bedding area that's very clean and dry. You know, you have your eating areas, and it's pretty much where they spend their lives.
Now, I feel like channeling my friend Ramona, who's an animal activist, to
Sure.
say at this point, well, but if they're living most of their life on very clean, dry, but still concrete, are they in a position to do enough of the things that a pig naturally does, or a pig is programmed to do, to really have a decent life?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I guess you'd have to ask the pig.
Well, you're as close to being able to speak for pig
Yeah, okay.
as anybody I'll ever talk to.
Well, I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah.
Like I said, so here's an example. When my dad tells of when my grandfather raised pigs, and we have a woods that's maybe 3/4 of a mile away from the farm site. So in the spring, the sows who were bred during the wintertime would disappear to the woods. You know, it's like they'd follow the pasture down there. They'd go in the woods and they'd make their nest down there. They'd have their litters. And my dad would say, well, a number of weeks later, they'd start heading back towards the farm. He said with a whole bunch of the wildest piglets you had seen. So that would probably, I mean, that was as close to their natural existence and as close to them being able to choose what they wanted to do without any confined enclosure, to be able to search out what they wanted as possible. So we're not doing that. So that would, what I just described, that happened back in probably the 40s, when people were raising a couple pigs or something like that. Speaking for pigs, I would say, yeah, that would be the choice, you know. And you'd probably, if you were observing that, you would probably observe behaviors that you maybe wouldn't see when they have an enclosure or a big hoop house where they have the dry bedding and the proper water and the proper ground up feed, you know. There was the question, are they content enough or expressing enough of their pigness?
Something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of how one of the ways philosophers have kind of tried to sort this out
Yeah.
is you know, do they get to be pigs?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That's probably a sliding scale. You know?
Yeah.
And boy, where would they be? I wouldn't even put a percentage. I want to put a percentage on it. I guess what farmers like us that are raising for these markets, you know, and this has been an interesting development too. I'll just go off on a tangent here for a second because I just took a trip to a number of the co-ops in Minneapolis to just check out their meat counters and see what they were doing, and talk to some of the butchers behind the meat counters, and that was interesting. So, you know, there's that whole real estate of the meat counter is really competitive, and you see, okay, this farm here is really plugged into the co-op market, and they're doing that, and you go to another co-op and it's not this farmer, but the other farmer is doing that. There's a couple of them that have that kind of locked up. And then I go to Whole Foods, and they have developed a kind of a scoring system that is, I think, supposed to help people like go up to the meat counters, make a decision like you're talking about. Is this animal, is it fulfilling its natural, you know, desires? And they've got like a five-point scale. 5 being probably as close to what people would imagine as being, you know, having a contented, fulfilling, porcine life as possible. And you know, that's interesting because that's become more and more important. That's not just like a philosophical animal welfare, animal rights issue, but it's filtered down to what people are starting to think about when they come to the meat counter, and they want some way to determine it. And so these scoring systems are developed, and then farmers like us raise for a company that has a set of protocols that are supposed to, that an outside auditor are supposed to be able to come in and observe, which they do on a yearly basis, and make sure that the Nuessmeiers are maintaining a 1 or a 2 or a 3, which all have different distinctions based on what's observed. So I guess I'm coming back around to that scale sort of thing. That's kind of where we exist. We're farmers like us that are maintaining this diversified farming setup and maintaining animals on the farm. That's kind of where we live. We maintain certain standards that allow us to keep doing what we do. And having done that, I can speak for my brother and I when we do some farrowing with sows, and they are in a pasture setup, and they do have their enclosure that protects them from the weather and in the cold in the spring or the heat in the summer, and they're able to have their litter, and they're out there, and after 2 days you see them starting to go out grazing, and you see this line of little piglets follow them through the pasture. I mean, we look at that, and I know both of us are thinking, God, we'd like to do it all this way. And maybe we will. If we stay in livestock, maybe that'll be the next development. We'll raise even less. And we'll do it in this way. We'd find it more satisfying, I'm sure. Of course, then on the economic side of it, there's that in the back of your mind. It's like, okay, we're doing this because this is a segment of our operation that provides us a certain income. And there's certain number economics. There's certain number of animals that you want to raise because the market says, okay, we'll pay you this much. If you've done a good job and you've maintained your, you've been able to manage it in such a way that you're not spending too much to raise this animal, this is the cut you get on top. So there's always that equation: how much is there, and how many you want to raise, and still conform to those standards. Getting back to my trip to the co-ops, this kind of an angle on that was, okay, what are other people doing that are kind of capturing this space, which is, you know, kind of a greater chunk, again, going into the whole theme of the farm of trying to do it in a way where economically you can maybe do better without having to follow the standard procedure in agriculture, which is more units because the margin's less, more bushels because there's less cents per bushel, more cattle because you have less and less per head, sort of a thing. So, you know, maybe that's an angle we'll take on it. We've already taken some steps in that direction, but that's a significant change. And with weather in Minnesota, there's you find yourself under certain restrictions. I mean, that you have that maybe farmers down in southern climates don't. So that's something we're still working on. But again, if you'd ask my brother and I, and if you're out there when we're working with animals, the more joyous times that you have working with livestock are that seeing a sow and piglets or growing pigs in that sort of environment that I had described, that my dad remembered when my grandfather had pigs and they went down to the woods and they came back when they were ready.
Yeah. So one thing you're telling me, if I get you right, is that the thing that would help you raise pigs the way you really want to, is if consumers began saying they wanted pigs that were raised that way and they were willing to pay for it.
Well, you know, yeah, but you know, we've done the direct marketing long enough too, where, you know, there's a line there. I mean, I think you know, it's a curious thing for me, and it's kind of interesting because people are more, as I said, more interested in where their food's coming from. I really think that's good. But they're not so interested that they're going to pay $8 for a pork chop. And you go to the co-ops and these pork chops are, you know, $7.50 for a pork chop. And apparently they're getting it. You know, I mean, there's challenges there too. It's you know, you can, if you back figure on the economics of that and you say, oh man, there's lots of money to be made here, that doesn't account for the fact that the pig isn't just all pork chops, you know. So, but there is a, you know, there is a line there. I mean, so there's certain realities. So I think on the side of a producer like us, you know, at some point, and this is it's just always an evolving situation ever since we've been in livestock. I mean, we've had this partnership commitment or relationship with the company that buys the majority of our animals. And then we do some of the direct marketing, which is a smaller slice of that, which is very interesting and that sort of thing. But in each of those, there's the economic realities of what people are willing to pay, what the company can afford to charge, and still have access to this counter space, which is just a super competitive turf, you know. Or for us, I mean, there's a lot of people that do what we do direct marketing wise. I mean, and that's good. So I imagine if someone looks at somebody and it's $1 a pound more, they'll probably look at somebody else. So there's always that, and you can't raise livestock and set them on a shelf and freeze them and say, or just freeze their growth and say, well, wait until we have the opportunity. They're constantly grow. Well, of course, but some people don't realize that they're constantly growing, and at a certain point, they have to be slaughtered, and you have to sell it if you're raising them, unless you're keeping them as pets. It's because you don't sell a 2-year-old pig to your customers and say, well, this is going to be the greatest eating experience you've ever had. So it's something that you constantly have to find a market for. It's just like if you're growing corn. I mean, you can keep storing corn at some point, but you have to sell it sometime. You can't store it forever.
Yeah. And you have a lot less options with animals.
Yeah, it's a item that has an expiration date.
Yeah. I'm wondering. I remember one of the central memories of my growing up was watching my uncle try to train pigs to an electric fence.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't very good at learning not to, and they're big enough they can take out an electric fence.
Yeah.
If they take a run at it, it goes.
Sure.
So you have to kind of give them a shock, and that involves getting them wet and touch the electric fence and enticing them, and they're too smart to kind of be enticed. And so I remember this training the pigs on the electric fence business. I also know that when I take my dog for a walk, there are all kinds of dogs in yards, wealthier people's yards, that they don't have fences and they don't move outside the yard because we have technology now that keeps dogs in yards without fences.
Okay.
So I'm wondering, is anybody working on technology to allow you to make some money off of humanely raised pigs? Is there stuff coming that's helping with this all?
Oh, sure.
Because you hear about the universities putting their money into figuring out how to get as many animals stuffed into the smallest space possible and manage the manure.
Yeah.
What's happening for the small farmer?
I think there is a lot because of the strength of these emerging markets for what's been called alternatively naturally raised or that sort of thing. That is basically a non-confinement, less concentrated sort of model. So it's enough of what I'd kind of described like, in my grandfather's time, not that, but it's certainly not the prevailing model today. And there's a lot of work being done, whether it's Iowa State or University of Minnesota. They do a lot of work on kind of group farrowing systems where you have, sows have free access. They have pens where they can turn around and access in and out, and setups where once the piglets are a certain age, there's group lactation where the whole group of sows and piglets are together. So there's designs that they work on. Through their observation, they realize what works and what doesn't, and there's products out there, whether it's a type of nesting box or something that is out there that conforms to the space standards and allows access while preserving as many of the piglets and things like that as possible. So it's you're seeing more of that, which is a good thing.
Uh-huh.
They're working on it. They're finding out which breeds do well in those sort of situations and that sort of thing. So yes, the universities are.
Well, I mean, do you think before you retire you can put up a sign at the gate, at the door, the driveway to your farm that says, "For as long as as they live, our animals are as happy as we are."
Oh, there'd be a marketing angle on that, right?
Can I think of you?
Yeah.
You could have sold your farm and gone off and played golf, but you don't like golf that much.
A friend of mine looked at our farm and said, "You know what this needs? Because it's kind of gently rolling." He said, "This would make a great golf course." Of course, that was 15 years ago. I probably should have taken his advice.
And you could have a nice secure life in an office that looked with a cubicle. It looked a whole lot like a hog confinement enterprise with a cafeteria that wasn't dissimilar from the way they feed the hogs.
So,
And you're not doing that, and you're not doing that. You're taking a certain cut in salary not to do that because that's the kind of life you want.
right.
And then there's the question, is there any way of nudging the economics around so you can give the animals as good a life as you have?
Yeah.
It has to be short. There's no way getting around the economics.
Yeah.
You can't give a pig a full lifespan unless it's a pet.
Right.
But if that isn't the issue, then it turns into a quality of life issue.
Right. The way my brother and I have talked about this, because you can't avoid this issue. The basic issue of, well, is this the right thing to be doing? Raising animals for our use, for our food, and I guess the way we see it is, it's the model. The model of a farm is kind of a diversified farm, and I mentioned it's organic, and we've sold through the organic markets. We've sold things into the Japanese market, and those organic standards are very strict. And what I'm getting at is the way they look at an organic farm. It's a self-contained sort of thing. You don't bring out any outside inputs. We don't go shopping around for rock phosphorus from Idaho or wherever. You farm the land you have, and you farm it in such a way where everything's recycled.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at it that way, animals, if you're going to raise grains, and that's a big economic choice there. You can't just probably raise grass unless you're grazing on it, which some people have opted to do. But if you're raising grains, so you have animals there to consume the grains, add value to the grains. The manure of the animals returns some of the nutrients that are in the grains back to the farm, and you're able to keep that kind of a closed loop. So in that way, they're just part of the cycle of the farm.